Hi. Hello, everybody. So today we're going to be talking about infrastructure as code. So in LimaCharlie land, infrastructure as code is kind of a big deal. If you haven't been exposed to this, you will absolutely be in the future. It's really the kind of main deliverable way that we're expanding and making it easier for you to manage everything at scale. So what is infrastructure as code? So put simply, it's the ability to represent what your tenant, right? I'll refer to tenant or organization, which is what we call the kind of the basic unit in LimaCharlie management. It's a way to represent your tenant, all of its configuration, everything about it. So that could be from detection rules all the way to outputs like forwarders of data, network policy, so net policies for your net endpoints, various forms of integration around the life cycle of your organization, everything about it. And it's to represent that as a configuration file. Ultimately, what it looks like is a piece of JSON or YAML. Usually, we'll represent it with YAML to represent that as a file. And the advantage of doing this is that it will allow you to keep track of the changes that you have to your organizations in a way that is kind of offline. You don't have to go and click 20 million times. It's going to be in a file. You'll be able to see it. And then from there, what it means is you can really truly embrace the DevOps approach to managing infrastructure, now including a lot of your security posture, by doing things like continuous integration and deployment pipelines. For example, you may want to have a specific flow from when one of your analysts publishes a new detection rule, right? They believe that they want to go and detect something, and you want that to eventually make it into production. But maybe before that, you want to have an approval process, or you want to leverage replay. So you'll see replay again is going to take a much bigger footprint in the future as we move forward, to allow you to easily test your rules against historical telemetry, but kind of in an offline fashion. So you'll be able to, using DevOps, really automate all of this. Obviously, there's a big spectrum here. You don't have to go deep dive into this whole thing. Maybe at first you don't even really want to. Maybe you're not managing yourself a lot of different tenants, right? So if you're not an MSSP, you probably are not dealing with quite the same level of complexity. But you'll see that there's still a ton that you gain from this. So I've mentioned a little bit, what you get. You will see that if you want to kind of get a full description of what it looks like at scale, let's say you are an MSSP or you're doing incident response, there's a couple of things that you will want to look at. So specifically, you'll see that we have a repository on GitHub called Msspe Demo. And that we've covered in previous webinars, and that will give you kind of the big picture of going from a repo with configs all the way there. However, today that's not really the focus. I suggest that if you're interested in kind of really that core like MSSP setup, the other webinar that we did on the topic is going to be maybe a better resource, at least in the long term, for that big kind of full, end-to-end integration. Today, what we are going to do is we're going to focus a little bit more on what's new in infrastructure as code. So specifically, we've made things a lot easier and a lot more accessible. So that hopefully sounds pretty good. So what I will do is I will start by sharing my screen. Here we go. So what we've added, it's pretty easy actually. What we'll do is I'll show you, and hopefully you'll start to get the idea right away. So I'm going to go into a test tenant, right? This is just a random organization I've created. If I go in the bottom left here, you'll see that there's a new menu item called infrastructure config. If you don't see it, it's because this, you'll see that this part of the new feature around infrastructure as code is provided by a service, a LimaCharlie service. It is now enabled by default on all new tenants. You create an org, it's going to be on there. If you have an older org and you want to do the testing, all you have to do is go in add-ons and then search for infrastructure as code, and you'll see it's right here at the bottom. So you'll be able to add it, and then wait a couple of seconds, and you'll be able to see the menu at the bottom left. So I'll go into this. So what we've done is we've moved the infrastructure as code to be more accessible. How did we do that? Well, you used to have to use the CLI or the command line interface to be able to manage infrastructure as code in LimaCharlie. We've taken all that complexity and put it into a managed service. So now you have a REST API that's really simplified that you can use to start to look at infrastructure as code and apply the changes without having a command line interface. It's all completely managed by LimaCharlie. So I went here into into the front page. Things are bound to change a little bit over time as we figure out the right way to expose the power. But what you see here by default is we've taken this pretty much empty organization, and we by default just fetched its current configuration. So as you can see, this is a pretty it's a pretty basic example. There's not much configured right now here. What is interesting is that you can now apply changes through this web interface. So not only, if I wanted, maybe this is a really complex tenant, I could copy paste that offline. Most basic thing you can do that allows you to get a backup copy of everything configured within your tenant. So that means that if you want to create maybe a staging tenant, you can create a new org, open it up here and just go at just paste your config, and you'll go, update config, and that will apply all the things. That'll apply those changes to that tenant. So it's kind of a really good way to clone entire organizations. What's important to note here is this viewport that you have here, right? This text part behaves in a specific way. It's a subset of what the service will allow you to do. The LimaCharlie infrastructure service behaves really the same way that the CLI used to, meaning you could give it either a small piece of configuration and just say add this, but you could also use a force mode where you say, what, I don't care what's in this tenant, I'm going to force apply this exact config and remove everything else. So it's kind of a good way to enforce that your configuration as you have it maybe in your repo is exactly what's in production. But by default here in this view, we want to limit the potential damage that maybe you do by mistake, or as you're kind of experimenting with the system. So what this view will allow you to do is only to add on to your organization. So you don't need to paste here your entire config that you want this organization to be. You can paste in a subset of configuration, and that will just be additive. It'll get added to your tenant, to your organization. So let's pick an example. Let's step through an example. Well, part of us kind of trying to make this simpler is you'll see that we've created a new repository that we call templates. So if you go, github.com/refactionpoint/templates, this is a central location where we will keep a curated list of templates that you can apply to your org. There's many different things that you can do here. So you'll see that, we have entire organization templates. Let's say if I go in here, I want basic coverage or basic coverage with virus total, right? So I'll just open this one up. You'll see a whole config that will apply some basic free coverage to your tenants. It's a good way to start experimenting, quickly and easily. But we'll also do things like, let's say on the antivirus side, I want to have the Windows Defender integration into this. So if I look here, you'll see that this is very specific to Windows Defender, or Microsoft Defender as it's called. And And so that means you'll be able to apply that. We'll go one way deeper to this. You'll see that we'll start really integrating the templates into the web interface of LimaCharlie, where we'll expose to you a top level list of templates that you can apply. If you want to sneak peek at what that's going to look like, this is a public repo, but here we're listing all of our templates as well as some basic information about them. So if you want to even crawl them yourself, you can do that. So let's pick an example. Let's go and pick, let's say, a process. So a process is kind of, a pretty vague explanation. But here, this sleeper deployment. So let's go look at the description of the sleeper deployment. So this is directly related to a brand new feature that we have since about a month ago, which is based on pure usage billing, right? Pure usage billing allows you to not be billed on the number of endpoints that you have deployed, the quota that you set, but rather on metrics of how many events come back from your deployment. One of the common use cases for that is sleeper deployment. So you want to deploy the EDR somewhere where, on 1,000 machines, it costs you next to nothing per month. And you want it to be available kind of very quickly to be able to turn everything on that tenant. And then you'll pay per event that's brought back by specific sensors. So if you're doing incident response, huge thing. And you will see, actually, we did a webinar a short while back about this. So let's try this process. Here's what it's going to do. So this will set up the events collected to be off by default. That way we don't get billed, right? No data comes from sensors by default. But on the sensors that have a live tag, these specific endpoints will start collecting data in real time. So what that means is once I apply this template, none of my endpoints will bring back data. But if I tag an endpoint with live, then that one endpoint will start bringing back data. So that will allow you to kind of set up, this lifecycle process really easily of I have a sleeper deployment, I get a call, I get on that endpoint, troubleshoot what's going on, and then I can add live to all my endpoints if I want, or just remove the live tag and then stop paying. So this is very cool. So let's take a look. So I'll just take the raw version of it. So I'm, just to copy paste and make sure I get just the text. This is all the configuration that's going to apply that. I'll go back to my tenant. Just erase everything and put this. Remember, this is additive, right? So I'm not going to destroy, DNR rules that may be in place or anything like that. I'm just going to set this specific setup. So I'll just hit update config. What's going on in the background is that we're asking the infrastructure as code service to go and start applying this. Very, very similar to if you had used the CLI in the past. Same thing. So now if I go and I look at exfil control, which is really the big thing that is configured, you will see that I have a bunch of different rules for exfil control. Like live macOS, which says if the live tag is there, then I want these events. So it's set up all that automatically by default, and that means that actually I don't have a sensor online right now, but if I had one, I could just go in, add the live tag, it would get applied. So that's pretty cool. Let's look at the different type of one. So let's say the Windows Defender. So you have Windows Defender that you're running, in your organization, like on your Windows endpoint, and you want to automatically alert through LimaCharlie in real time to any detection from Defender. Well, all you have to do is you can come in here, copy paste this. We will go back to infrastructure config. And then you'll see it's refreshing. So as you'll see, it's refreshing right now in the background. There we go. It's a tiny update. But what I want to do is I just want to come here and yeah, I just want to apply this whole thing. If you look a little bit more into details about what it's going to be doing, it's going to install a bunch of different Windows event log of rules that operate on WEL events, so Windows event log events. And it's also going to create the artifact rule, which will go and set it up so that we collect in real time Defender Windows event logs. So if I click that, I'll go and update this. Again, same thing's happening in background. Here we go. It's applied. So that means that if I want now to go and look at the DNR rules, here we go. All my rules have been applied. I can kind of jump into one, see what it's going to do. Yeah, you're set up. If I go back to the service, and I'll just refresh the page to get right away a clean version, you will see that from now on, if I fetch the configuration from that tenant, you will see that it will contain all these changes. Here we go. So you see all our changes are in there. So that is pretty cool. That's kind of the part that's new here. You will see that this is going to start seeping in through a lot of different aspects. Specifically, we're going to make it a lot easier to create a tenant based on the template, right? Those organization templates that I mentioned right here, all these things. So we're going to be publishing a lot of solutions that use LimaCharlie based on templates, because that way it's kind of an easy way, so you don't have to architect the whole thing. But sometimes, you probably know LimaCharlie is, infrastructure, Lego blocks type thing. So sometimes, to go and do some complex type of automation, you need to leverage a couple of different pieces. The templates will allow you to do that really easily. Also, feel free to contribute templates. This is a public repo. If you want to create a PR and just set up a new template about integration with some product that you have or anything like that, feel free to bring that in. So there are, I think I mentioned, antivirus organization process, right, around like just running operations in a specific way. And then we also have, for example, I want to call out this example around the solution, which is kind of, again, a pretty generic kind of set of concerns. And what this is setting up here is, I want the ability to, I want to collect PCAPs, full PCAPs from LimaCharlie Net, all my endpoints, and I want to retain them for 60 days. And then this is also going to set up the integration with Zeek so that all of those PCAPs get processed by Zeek in the cloud in LimaCharlie, and the resulting logs are retained for a full year. So again, you'll be able to just apply this and then kind of, gain this set of power kind of across the whole board of LimaCharlie. This service you can access through the web interface, but you can also access it through the API. So if you come in here, it's like all other LimaCharlie services. So there's a REST endpoint on api.limacharlie.io where you can make requests to LimaCharlie services. This works in the same way, but the parameters that you can, pass on are kind of documented here. And you'll see that in fact it's got even more power than we really leverage on the side of the web app, because you can directly apply ARLs to it. So instead of providing a whole config yourself, you can give it an ARL, which is Authenticated Resource Locator. It's kind of our way. It's a open source technology we put out there that allows you to wrap together in a single line a reference to a specific set of resources that goes along with authentication. So if you have a private repo, you can have an ARL that will point to GitHub with those credentials for private repo, and LimaCharlie will go and fetch the configuration directly from there. So it just makes it that much easier to kind of build automation around everything. Finally, I think I mentioned a couple of times, we also have the command line interface, right? So the command line interface is still there. So it's the configs. If you install, it's our Python SDK or CLI. And then that will allow you to do exactly what I kind of went over, but in a more direct fashion. So LimaCharlie configs --help to kind of get, you know, the full spectrum of capabilities, but it'll allow you to do things like dry run, right? So you can apply config in a dry run, and the service will tell you, here's what I would have done in there. And so that's absolutely supported through the CLI. And then I think the last bit you will want to check out is Msspe Demo that I mentioned briefly, but that will be useful. Again, we have this other webinar, but you'll see that it kind of covers all best practices for an MSSP or somebody that's managing at scale. So you'll have the best practices here in terms of like access control, configuration management, and it's also a real working live example. So it's got GitHub workflows or GitHub actions, I think they call now, that automates the application, but then we'll also show you, you know, example of splitting up all those config files into different ones, you know, more dedicated config files, and then wrapping them up together, you know, using kind of a wrap up config. So that way you can compose a tenant. You don't have to keep one config file per org, but rather you can, you know, keep your config files in, you know, in the intent that they have, right? So here's all the rules, the global rules. Here's all the rules for maybe it's the orgs, you know, of your customers that pay you for a specific additional service. So you can keep it in a different config file and then kind of link that in. So yeah, this is a you know, real life working example. It's public, so that will be super valuable to you as well. This is a little bit of a shorter one today. You know, we kind of wanted to really highlight those new capabilities that you have. And you'll see those again show up more and more in LimaCharlie. At the very least, we encourage you to, you know, keep a backup locally, for example, of your configs. It's kind of a great way to be able to share with your team, you know, things that you intend to change, things that you intend to apply, all those kinds of things. I don't know if you have, if there's any questions. Happy to take a look. Cool. Awesome. Well, happy to see that it seems like people appreciate this. So that's really good. As usual, if you have any questions, you know, feel free to kind of jump on our slack.limacharlie.io. That's our open community. People, you know, contribute, ask questions. That's also, we can do more one-on-one, you know, support or kind of help you with specific designs that you have in mind. Doc.limacharlie.io, all our documentation's there. edu.limacharlie.io, all the kind of training to get you going is all freely available online there. And then finally, we have a channel on YouTube that's also going to be super valuable. You know, youtube.com/LimaCharlieIO. Thanks for listening, and yeah, we'll see you around. Thank you.